Welcome back, everyone, to episode 75 of the Guardian Project podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and Coyle, have you ever read the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know the one that starts with two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. You know who didn't read that poem? Eligeth Crossroads Augur. Oh. He knew which road to take. I assume it's the road less traveled.
Okay, yeah. It's... Who is this character?
The one that knows he knows the road to take.
Oh, okay.
You know, I wonder if this card's inspired by Robert Frost. I'll have to ask Gavin. Maybe I'll have to tweet that later.
You think he's going to be featured in Call Time, Robert Frost? Since it's going to be like cold and snowy?
Absolutely. Robert Frost. Forget Eligeth. Yeah. Robert
Frost and Jack Frost, like same card. Meld cards together.
Jack Frost.
And I'm your other host, Mike Coyle. And the other day I finally won with my Jahzzar deck. And I don't really know how I assembled the combos. Whatever. The devil's in the details.
And this is the podcast where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering.
But mostly Commander.
So, speaking of Jahzzar, you did play that deck last week on stream, and it did a lot of work.
Yeah, so I've played the deck literally twice, ever. And the first time around that I played it, it did some chaosy things, and it was kind of fun. And then the second time, it was like, oh, this deck does do things.
Yeah, at first I thought it was going to be difficult playing that on stream, but you can really get everybody that's in chat involved because you're like, hey chat, I need a number 1 to 5 to randomly discard. And I really hope it's not the one good card. Oh, it was.
Goodbye, Chaos Warp. Goodbye.
It was my actual removal to get rid of permanents. I was like, oh, I don't think I have anything else. I didn't. And there was no other answers.
I am 2 for 2 in resolving an Aeon engine with my Jahzzar deck. So every time we play Jahzzar, that turn order is getting reversed.
You know, it's so funny that did happen because we had people coming into stream and they were like, this is actually unnerving seeing this going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And then funny enough, after we had finished, we raided over to the Commander Rules Committee.
Yeah.
And there was a Jahzzar deck on stream there too.
Yeah, there was. And in fact, that player had both a Goblin Bombardment and a Havoc Jester out. And those were actually two of the cards that I used to win, combined with a Jaya Venerated Fire Mage, which after the player shared their deck list with me, I found out they also played Jaya Venerated Fire Mage in there. So maybe my Jahzzar deck isn't very unique, but I didn't net deck it or anything. So we have the same ideas.
Yeah, no, that deck I think is really cool, and you haven't tweaked it very much yet, so I'm sure that it will change quite a bit, and it's a lot of card advantage for you.
Birthing Bow's really Unwinding Clock, put it in every deck.
Yep. So I can take it with a Thieving Skydiver for no value. Another thing that we've been working on are art decks. So we're going to be playing an art deck with a specific art theme with Tap That MTG on our stream the night before Thanksgiving. So it's over a week from now. Or I guess when this episode comes out, it'll be exactly 1 week from the release date of this episode. So I figured we could talk for just a minute about the decks that we built. So what are you playing for this art theme night?
So this is actually my first Naya deck that I've ever built.
Okay.
And we are playing Samut, Voice of Dissent.
Okay.
In the art style of people yelling and screaming. So every single artwork has a humanoid in the artwork frame yelling or screaming. So I took out like beasts that are yelling and blah, blah, blah. So it has to be a humanoid, whether that is, a human, an elf, a goblin or something, screaming or yelling in every single artwork, except for the lands. The lands I didn't do it with, but I'm not playing, according to Architect, I'm playing a $6 mana base in my lands. So it's nothing crazy and no fetch lands or anything like that. But Yeah, I don't really know what the win condition is in this other than swinging with Samut. Samut's pretty great. Flash, double strike, vigilance, hastes. And actually, one of my favorite cards in here is a card that we talked about in our 10 under 10 episode, and that is Martyr's Cry. It's a white sorcery. It says all white creatures are removed from the game. Players then draw one card for each white creature that was removed from the game this way, which is also kind of cool. In most decks, if you're playing white, your commander is white, but Samut actually only has white activated ability, so Samut doesn't get exiled with this ability.
Okay.
So it has the ability to like make a bunch of tokens, and most of the tokens are white, and so I can exile the tokens for card draw. And so and it also features someone yelling and or screaming in the artwork.
That's funny. So I initially was going to be building a deck that had what was my initial one that I was working on?
It was Knees in the Air.
Well, that's what it is now. Well,
okay.
It's just bent knees.
Bent knees.
So in every card, there's a character whose knee is bent. Mm-hmm. Either they're sitting crisscross style, or they're like flying in the air and one of their knees is bent, or they're kneeling down or falling, but their knee is definitely bent.
I remember you were thinking of doing music related. I think.
Yeah, so everything was going to have like an instrument or like music notes or something referencing. Yeah, so it was initially going to be music, and I had a music deck that was tabletop a long time ago, like a 60 card, just like, but there were multiple of them, like cards that just have like bards in them, or like there's liars in a lot of cards that
no
tap
truth,
for mana.
no truthers, only liars.
Only liars.
Gotcha.
Liars. So I actually, it's funny because I started putting this deck together after I saw Lisa Shroud of Dusk or Liza Shroud of Dusk.
Mm-hmm.
I like to call her Lisa, and it was, it'd be really funny to do a music themed deck with Lisa and have her from like the Von Trapp family, where she can say adieu to you and you and you. But that's not that was funny, but I was like, I don't think I can do this deck, especially not the amount of time that I had. So Lisa Shroud of Dusk is the Orzhov angel from Commander Legends, and her knee is bent. She's like flying away, but her knee's bent. And so I said, well, let's see how many cards I can find with their knees that are bent. And so it was really fun because we use Scryfall Tagger. If you also aren't aware on how you can find some of these, you can search for things that people have already tagged based on the artwork. But then as you do it or you find something, we can go into there and tag that card so that people in the future, can see it. For like Lisa, you can tag her as having a bent knee, wings, holding a weapon, I don't know, the sky is present. You just tag whatever you find. So some of my favorite ones, I think, were like the card Planar Cleansing.
Oh, yeah.
There's a bunch of people in the air, but one of the people in the air's like legs are completely bent. They're getting like cleansed away.
Yikes.
Soren Vengeful Bloodlord. I mean, there's a big old knee. Lightning Greaves, the specific artwork with the bent knee running, just the boots. So this was a lot of fun finding cards like this. I didn't realize there was a mono white fog card until I looked here from that also has a bent knee. Holy Day. Creatures attack and block as normal, but don't deal any damage. They're still tapped. So anyway, I had a lot of fun. I posted it on Twitter to make sure that people could check my homework. Yeah. So I was like, some of these are arguable.
Yeah. I say I think I have at least a few of the same things here, because I was going to mention it, that it's the card Smothering Tithe. The character on that card is like puking gold, but they seem
he's not doing it silently.
No, there's probably a lot of anguish, but I don't know if that's yelling or screaming, or if he's just like, oh, I don't know. So as of right now, it's not in the deck, which actually does keep it under $100. So I kind of like that extra caveat of keeping it under $100. So we'll see.
Mine's at $150. I mean, we didn't have a budget or anything.
We did.
I figure if you're looking for specific things, it's hard. I put Sir Conrad in here. Sure. And you see his knee, but it's like barely. It's trailing off.
What's your most expensive card in the deck?
All right, let me
with
the
artwork. With the artwork.
With the specific.
Yeah, so not like a land or anything that maybe doesn't have the artwork.
Okay, the most expensive card in the deck, period, is Sarah Ascendant.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
a flying. It's $15, but it's definitely got a bent knee as it's ascending.
Right.
How about you?
Mine is Arachnogenesis, baby. I found a place for it.
That's really funny. I've got Rankle, Master of Pranks is in here. It's a $10 card. Did you know Erebos, God of the Dead's like climbing up out of the dead? His knees up in the air.
I had no idea.
His knees up in the air. And then there's an Ajani from one of the dual decks, and Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis. Her knee's definitely bent.
Mm-hmm.
But I am playing Exsanguinate. There is a bent knee right in the front of that card.
Damn. I'm going to get exsanguinated.
You are. And Anguished Unmaking. I've got Anguish. Addison is like falling down and her knees bent. Oh, yeah. I'm so excited to play this deck.
It's going to be fun.
This deck. Yeah. So anyway, tune into that game next week if you would like to watch that live. And before we start, if you want to support us, you can head to patreon.com. Thank you to everybody who supports us every single month, every week or every day. We have a lot of people that talk about our show, reach out to us. And if you would like to join the family, you can support for any dollar amount. I know we say family. Should it be Combine? If you would like to join our Combine, Summit Combine.
Cult? Oh, sorry.
Not a compound.
Well, I mean, a Combine, I don't know. It kind of, it screams cult to me, but you said Simic Combine, and I'm like, oh, wait, Rakdos Cult, Simic Combine. Those are two different things.
Yeah. Well, if you want to support, again, patreon.com/Guardian Project Pod.
If you want to put +1/+1 counters on all of your permanents, you can support us. And if you're looking for another way to support the podcast, really easy. Whatever you are listening to the podcast on now, whether it's Spotify or YouTube, if you could leave a like, if you could follow, subscribe, hit that bell icon if you want to get notifications on our YouTube. If you are on YouTube, please also check out our streams from our streaming on Thursday. We post all of our streams on our YouTube channel as well. And we also have a TCG Player affiliate link located in the show notes below or the description below. And if you want to follow there, if you're looking for any of your singles or sealed product through TCG Player, we would very much appreciate that.
Yeah, and what's funny is we had a bunch of our links that we weren't putting in all of our show notes. So we've also got our website down there. We've got YouTube down there now. The actual link to Patreon is now in the show notes.
Do we put our YouTube link in our YouTube description?
No.
Okay, good, because that would be funny.
That would be silly.
Yeah,
but we could.
Let's just do it.
Let's be rebels and put our YouTube link in our YouTube
videos.
Ooh,
baby!
If you want to find us, go find us on YouTube and then hit the link in the bottom to take you back up to the top of the video.
This is how we're going to get banned from YouTube, because there's going to be some arbitrary rule we don't know about where you're not allowed to link to other YouTube URLs or something in your YouTube description. I don't know.
Or, who knows? Coyle, what are we talking about this week?
It seems we only have one subject to talk about this week, but it's a really, really cool one. It's our first patron deck tech.
Yes.
So Chris Kelsom, he is the one that provided his deck tech for his Marchesa, the Black Rose deck. And I don't want to give away too much before we get into the details of this deck tech.
Yeah, so Chris Wolfe sent us his deck, also known as Kelsom Gaming on Twitter, and we will be breaking this down. So I am very excited. So are you ready to just jump into it?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do this. All right, so we are going to be going through a deck tech for Marchesa, the Black Rose. So if you were not aware, one of our patron rewards in one of our tiers is submitting one of your commander decks for for Commander of the Week. So we are going to be looking through a modular deck this week. Helmed by Marchesa, the Black Rose. Coyle, would you like to walk us through Marchesa?
Yeah, so Marchesa the Black Rose is in arguably the best color combination in Magic. And I do say arguably because there's Sultai too. But so Marchesa is in Grixis. So we have 1, a blue, a black, and a red for a human wizard 3/3 with keyword dethrone. And dethrone is whenever this creature attacks the player with the most or tied for most life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And would you believe it? Other creatures you control also have dethrone. Now, this deck is built around this last ability here on Marchesa, and that is whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step.
Yes, so this deck is going to be built in a way that sacrifices creatures, and we'll obviously get into all of these mechanics. But before we start, this deck feels a lot like a deck you play.
It does. So it's like a deck I play, but also with blue and red. So it's very similar to Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker, in that special keywording of at the beginning of the next end step. So that does not say your end step. Therefore, you can actually use this ability, or this ability goes on the stack at the end of every player's end step. Allowing for, in a typical Marchesa deck and definitely in a Shirei deck, for an aristocrat style deck of sacrificing your own creatures and returning them to the battlefield. In Shirei, you have the caveat of the creatures have to be power 1 or less in order for them to get this reanimation. And here in Marchesa, the creatures have to have a +1/+1 counter on it, but there is some extra synergy there with this dethrone ability from Marchesa in order to get those +1/+1 counters. But in this particular deck, I don't think we're going to have to do that very often.
I don't think so either. And what's interesting about this is that Marchesa sets up a delayed trigger. So if Marchesa's not on the battlefield, when that next end step hits, those creatures will come back, which is a little different than Shirei's, correct? Right. Because Shirei does have to be present.
Shirei must be present at the time that the creatures. It's not only when I don't even believe, and I correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Even if the trigger goes on the stack, I don't think they come back if Shirei gets removed while the trigger is on the stack. I think Shirei still has to be present for the trigger to resolve. So Shirei is very interruptible, where Marchesa, you can get around.
It's a little bit more work. It's a little bit more work to take care of this one. So so when Chris worked on getting us some information about his deck, he gave us a history about the deck, which is really nice actually to set up how he came to this. So, he said that Grixis was one of the hardest color combinations that was where he was finding it difficult to build a deck that seemed really unique. They were, building or a mechanic specifically that seemed unique, right? Instead of just playing, hey, I'm going to play these 15 artifacts and they're played in every single artifact deck. This one allowed him to play with some different artifacts. And at the same time, one of his favorite mechanics was modular. So he really liked Affinity, playing in a non-commander format. So he wanted to see if he could focus on that type of a strategy where you play modular cards like an Arcbound Ravager, and you move counters around and then they can, be reanimated in some other way. And so that was kind of, where this deck initially started to grow from.
Yeah, very interesting take with Marchesa as an artifact style deck. Grixis does have a lot of artifact support, but Marchesa is definitely, Marchesa being very creature oriented, you wouldn't think would be an artifact deck. But yeah, this unique take on modular and taking notes from the Affinity Modern deck is definitely interesting. And, both of us have had the opportunity to play against this deck, I believe more than once. And
I think it might have lost to this deck on more than one occasion.
Yeah, I think so too. It is a fairly strong deck. It's not overpowered, played it in the right pods and everything.
Absolutely.
Grixis is just inherently good with control mechanics, but at the same time, like Andy already mentioned, Chris was trying to get this to be like an interactable Grixis deck, not something that you throw the 10 regular artifacts into, and the 10 counter spells and the 10 removal spells, and then you fill in the other 10 cards to make your Grixis unique deck. But this one is actually very, very unique.
Yeah. Specifically, I mean, he even mentioned trying out Breya and Sharum the Hegemon and just saying, they were fine, but they weren't what he was looking for. So I think this is exactly where the deck landed. So specifically, the theme of this deck at its core is an aristocrat style deck. Chris did send this along to no one's surprise. So if you played with Kelsum Gaming before, he does play a lot of decks that sacrifice, bring things back, might even loop it a couple of times with maybe a living end. And so anyway, the deck is first and foremost an aristocrats deck, but he said second, it's an artifact deck. So the sub theme there is artifacts are number 2. And then the primary function is to get Marchesa on the board, put counters on things, and then sacrifice them so that they return at the end of every turn and not just on the player's turn. So that's really what this deck is. So as we go through this, keep in mind that it was specifically built for that, and that while there certainly are areas that you could change cards, it was built with this mechanic in mind.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead? We have really our first area to look at is +1/+1 counters, how you can make them and why they matter.
Right. So there's tons of ways that you're going to get +1/+1 counters on your creatures in order to make Marchesa's ability trigger at the end of every end step. If you're not familiar with the keyword modular, which is what this deck was really, the namesake for this deck is modular. Modular is a keyword on artifact creatures that says, this creature enters with a number of +1/+1 counters. Usually the modular creatures are 0/0s that enter with like 1 to 3 +1/+1 counters. And then the modular ability says when this creature dies, you have the ability to move these +1/+1 counters onto, I think I'm gonna pull one up just so I'm not wrong. If it's another artifact creature,
you move it
or
to
if
a
it's
target artifact creature.
Okay,
you move it to a
target
artifact
creature
creature specifically. Yes.
So this both allows your modular creatures to come back with the Marchesa ability, as well as put +1/+1 counters on your artifact creatures that maybe do not have the modular ability on them, in order to bring those cards back with the ability.
Right. So, and we'll go through individual cards, but I mean, we're talking Arcbound Ravager, Arcbound Stinger, Arcbound Worker, and then we've even got the new Scrapyard Recombiner from Modern Horizons that have this modular ability stapled right onto them. And since some of these are some of the better creatures in the deck, because that modular ability means that really their counters can be moved to another artifact creature. So when these die, they're going to come back, and that other creature that didn't have a counter on it now has a counter on it. When that one dies, it's going to come back, and it just kind of starts. It might potentially start snowballing, which is what we've seen. Now, I guess also we didn't mention this. The deck is like a 6 to like a 7.5, depending on the pod you're playing it in, is what we have it tagged at. Also, we are going to have this deck list in the show notes below, so feel free to take a look. It's a really cool deck. So keep in mind, this was built to play with friends. This is not some crazy tune deck that you're going to take to some pod and try to crush games. This is meant to be a very fun deck that has a lot of interaction.
Right. Interaction and interactable.
Absolutely. So as long as Marchesa's out, the deck is really functioning in if you remove something, I guess it's not really that big of a deal, because I was probably just going to sacrifice it or try to remove it on my own. So it might be a problem now, but in this case, Marchesa is definitely a targetable creature. You would like it gone. Now they're going to put counters on Marchesa as well. But that would be the way, I guess, to slow this specific deck down, would be to play Marchesa. And then there's lots of creatures that do things here that can put counters on. And then when they die and enter the battlefield, they have abilities to help you draw cards, or I guess they really have other abilities to help keep you ahead, right?
Right. Now, dealing with, this is at its base an aristocrat strategy. you have a card like Grim Horospecs, which everyone is going to play in their Aristocrats deck and get you to draw cards. Every time a non-token creature you control dies, you get to draw a card. And, having the ability on, again, Marchesa to do it on every turn, you might be able to draw many, many, many cards before it even comes back to your turn for you to spend all that mana.
Absolutely. So let's talk about making counters. So how are we going to put counters on creatures? So specifically, we've got cards like Steel Overseer. So Steel Overseer is an artifact creature for 2 colorless. It's a 1/1 that says tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. There's a lot of artifact creatures in this deck.
There is quite a few.
There's quite a few. We've got Metallic Mimic. Metallic Mimic, you choose a creature type, and when each other creature you control that enters the battlefield will enter with a +1/+1 counter if it's the creature type that you chose. So specifically in this deck, this is one of the ways that you put counters on Marchesa. So Chris did advise that Metallic Mimic is usually naming human, so that the counters can be placed specifically on Marchesa.
Mm-hmm. So that because Marchesa's ability can bring Marchesa back herself.
Absolutely. Yeah, which is really good. And then I think that the next one is really, it's funny. I always forget this card exists. And it's a card that I wanted to add to a deck that I did take apart, but the card is Unspeakable Symbol. So it's an enchantment that costs 1 black, and it says pay 3, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You pay 3 life.
Pay 3 life. No mana.
Pay 3 life. No mana.
How could there be downside?
You know what the best part about this is it specifically works so well with Dethrone.
Right.
Because a lot of the time you might be able to block things until the end of time. And then you have the highest life total and you're like, well, Dethrone's not really doing a whole lot. Not that Dethrone isn't important here, but sometimes it'd be nice to just be able to swing at someone else that has life that's higher than yours. Using Unspeakable Symbol and paying 3 life to get yourself under somebody else so that you're not the highest, so Dethrone will trigger, seems like a really interesting way to go about this.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that you do have to be careful with, it's the same. It has this Unspeakable Symbol has the same kind of downside that Necropotence has, and this might be very unique and only specific to certain play groups. But if someone controls your turn, you lose the game because they're just going to pay 40 life into it. Well, in this case, in multiples of 3, so 39 life into it. You cannot pay life that you do not have. So if you don't have a multiple of 3 life, you won't die.
Well, I want to pay all your life, so
you're gonna pay most of it if I don't have a multiple of 3 in my life total. So it is one thing that you do have to look out for, but you can be very greedy with it, but it's such an easy way to just put +1/+1 counters on everything.
It's so interesting. And I used to play an Xava Rakdos Bloodwitch deck. And I forgot that Unspeakable Symbol existed, and that is a card that probably should have been in that deck and was not.
Right. And this deck or this card particularly saw an uptick in, and I know the price. You can get it for under $3, but it was a lot cheaper before Villas, Broker of Blood, was printed.
Ah.
Yes, because a 3-mana enchantment where you can just pay 3 life, draw 3 cards, and put a +1/+1 counter on your giant flying demon commander is pretty darn good.
Yeah, that's great. One of the next cards here, a very interesting card, Extruder. So it's an artifact creature. It's a 4/3 for 4 mana, just 4 generic mana, that has Echo. So Echo is at the beginning of your upkeep. If this permanent came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, you sacrifice it unless you pay a cost. So it's usually the cost of the creature itself. This is an artifact creature that says sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you can put counters on the creature that you are most worried about getting removed, like Marchesa. You're like, all right, I guess I'll sacrifice this artifact, which is potentially an Arcbound Ravager, and then I'm going to move the counters from Arcbound Ravager to Extruder, and then I'm going to put the counter on Marchesa, and now Arcbound Ravager comes back, and everybody's happy again. It's like, oh my gosh, the loop, and I didn't even realize this card existed.
Yeah, I didn't.
It just seems really, really fun for a deck like this.
Yeah, and it's important to note that Extruder can put +1/+1 counters on itself. So it can save itself, and then you can not have to pay the Echo cost, and then it kills itself with the Echo trigger, and then it'll come right back with the Marchesa trigger. So that's really cool.
sack outlets are a premium, and we'll get to that. But we know that losing your sack outlet in a deck that needs a sack outlet is pretty detrimental. I mean, like I know we mentioned that you play a Shirei deck, but sometimes after that Ashnod's Altar or the Phyrexian Altar is removed, you're like, I just need a sack outlet. I just got to get to one because I can't do a whole lot until I have it. So they're like they're primo in decks like these.
Absolutely. Now, typically when we are building a deck and we're giving suggestions to build a deck, maybe this is only personally, so Andy, you tell me if you agree. I tend to stay away from some of these, what I consider win more cards. And I think if a win more card only cost me 1 mana and was also an artifact, I might very, very well consider this to be a worthwhile win more card. And we got one of these for this particular deck in the newest set of Ikoria, and that is the Ozolith or the Ozolith.
The Ozolith is so good.
Yeah, so the Ozolith allows you, whenever a creature you control that has any counters on it dies, you can put those counters on the Ozolith, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can move those counters from the Ozolith onto that creature. So in a deck that is an Aristocrats deck, all about +1/+1 counters, you're just going to start building and building and building this huge, huge stack of +1/+1 counters, which is really, really cool. On top of the fact that modular, if you stick all these counters on a modular creature, not only do all the +1/+1 counters go to the Ozolith, but they also go to another artifact creature. You know, it's those two abilities will both occur. You don't have to choose whether to put the +1/+1 counters on the Ozolith or a creature. The Ozolith will get the counters regardless.
Yes, and it's nice because you can sacrifice, let's say you play Marchesa and you sacrifice another creature like Arcbound Ravager, and then you put the counters on the Ozolith, and then you go to combat, you put those counters on Marchesa. At the end step, Arcbound Ravager comes back. Those counters have now just moved to Marchesa, and Marchesa is not an artifact. So and because modular requires that it moves them over specifically to an artifact creature. And with the Ozolith, you can get counters that aren't just +1/+1 counters, which is interesting. Not that I've looked too much at the synergies here of whether or not there's any sort of like reach counters with the keyword counters, which is specifically what the Ozolith was really unique to play with. But it's so interesting that all those counters can just get thrown onto the Ozolith here and then thrown onto Marchesa, because Marchesa then requires 2 removal spells to get rid of.
That's right. And that's if you don't also have your Metallic Mimic out that makes it just enter with a +1/+1 counter already anyways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, now the one thing you do have to look out for, and we keep talking about how resilient this deck is to removal, is it does say when this creature dies. So it does have to be destroyed in some way. If you do exile the creature, you do kind of get rid of it forever. So you do, if you ever happen to play against a Queen Marchesa, or sorry, not a Queen Marchesa, the Black Rose deck, it is important to know that exiling is going to be your best friend.
Yes, well, and also remember, the Ozolith does in fact say whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield.
That's
so
true.
Someone bounces all those things, you do get to put stuff on the Ozolith. I mean, I guess a Cyclonic Rift, then you don't. But I think the Ozolith is a really interesting card in a deck that's built this way.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some utility cards here. So specifically, Chris mentioned that he does not run much protection in this deck in the form of, hexproof or shroud, because the deck really revolves around the idea of cards are just going to come back into play anyway. So go ahead and remove my creature because I pretty much need it to die and then come back because that's really just going to help me. So some utility cards here. There's a Lightning Greaves. It's the only real protection in the deck because it has a 0 cost activation. And, specifically this deck has cards that cost quite a bit of mana or are specific. They're like color intensive. We've got a Nicol Bolas Dragon God here. There's a couple of Planeswalkers with 2 color pips. Obviously Marchesa costs 3 colors. Nicol Bolas Dragon God has 3. So there's not a ton here in the form of protection for specific creatures.
Right. Now, you do get a little bit of protection from spells and stuff, though. One card that Chris really pushes and says we should play more in Commander, and I don't disagree. Not that I have it in any decks that I own. It's a really good idea. And that's Spellskite. Spellskite is a house in Modern, and again, that's kind of where Chris came from when he built this deck from his Affinity deck. So you have Spellskite, and Spellskite has an ability to pay a Phyrexian blue in order to redirect a spell to Spellskite, and this could be really good to help. Make it so someone has to use 2 different pieces of removal just to exile Marchesa or something like that. And because they have to get rid of Spellskite first. It's even really good against a Voltron deck if they're running enchantments, because you can go, I change the target of your enchantment to my Spellskite instead, which is actually how it's really played in Modern against Boggles, against Pants on Boys.
Yeah, I lose to that in Modern with the Boggles deck. But it's nice because if you can put a +1/+1 counter on Spellskite and then target itself, obviously with its ability to eat up one of those removal spells, let's say it's just destroy target creature, Spellskite's going to just come right back. That can be pretty nasty if what you're running is targeted removal and not obviously board wipes or mass removal here. Although the Spellskite will keep coming back, that will be a problematic card. And I do agree. I do think Spellskite is probably a little underplayed. And it's affordable now. I remember it used to be a little bit more, but it looks like it's around $5 now. So really interesting, specifically to have as your removal, because it's an artifact creature that can benefit from all of those modular triggers.
Yeah, speaking of this Spellskite returning over and over again with the +1/+1 counter, we do see a non-artifact creature in this suite of protection as well at Glenalendra Archmage. So Glenalendra is a fairy wizard, or Glenalendra Archmage. Sorry, Glenalendra is not its name. Glenalendra is the type of Archmage that this fairy is. It's a 2/2 fairy wizard for 4 mana with flying that you can pay a blue to sacrifice it and counter target non-creature spell. But this creature has a keyword called persist. So if this creature does not have any -1/-1 counters on it when it dies, it returns to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter, which can very easily be taken away by putting a +1/+1 counter on Glenalendra Archmage, making it almost infinitely returnable.
Yeah. It's a very good card. I also feel like Glenalendra is a card that was very expensive. It might be more realistic now. It's around $8. But this card coming back with the minus counter and then getting a +1/+1 counter put on it from virtually everything, I feel, in this creature suite. I mean, not exactly everything, but there are so many ways to put a +1/+1 counter on this. You're going to have a counter spell sitting out, just waiting. I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you with that non-creature spell.
Now,
it's really strong.
Now, if Glenalendra Archmage has a +1/+1 counter on it and you use a blue to sacrifice it to counter a non-creature spell, you can... I think it does still come back with the persist trigger immediately. I don't think you can choose not to have it come back with the persist trigger. So there's probably not too much of a benefit to putting +1/+1 counters on the Glenalendra Archmage before it has that -1/-1 counter on it already from the persist trigger.
Absolutely. Speaking of counters, Swan Song in the deck, one of the only counter spells, but really important specifically because it's 1 mana. So artifacts and enchantments are often responsible for ending games. And so being able to stop something that can get rid of one of the cards in this deck that is the engine is extremely important. So Swan Song being 1 blue mana is the reason why it is still existing in the deck. He did mention I'd love to get a mana drain for the deck, but it wasn't really in the stars at the time, but Mana Drain was just reprinted in Commander Legends.
Yeah.
So, we might open one and the deck might change just a little bit. So, having some counter spells, sure. I don't know if I might value counter spells a little higher than they are, but I also get targeted when I play counter spells in a specific deck. So we'll see. I don't know what the real answer is there.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised when I was reading Chris's primer that he was looking to add a mana drain, but didn't just have the very simple counter spell blue in the deck. But reading more into the primer, he talks about how mana intensive the deck is, and mana drain actually being an extra ramp spell as well, because you do get colorless mana on the next main phase.
Right. So another card here that we've got that is going to help do some work is Scrap Mastery. So Scrap Mastery is a sorcery for 3 red. Each player exiles all artifacts from their graveyard, then sacks all artifacts they control, and then all the cards that they exiled from their graveyard they put onto the battlefield. So you're really just flipping all of your artifacts from play to graveyard and vice versa. In many cases, this card can get you all of the things that you perhaps lost early in the game if you didn't have Marchesa back in the late game, and can really hose a lot of people's mana bases if they are focusing on playing with rocks.
Yeah. Someone casts an austere command and they destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and you're like, oh no, it's so darn. What am I gonna do now?
Much sadness.
Cast Scrap Mastery. All right, we're back in business, boys.
Yeah, I have a Duretti Scrap Savant deck, and Scrap Mastery I value so highly. And this card is very cheap. If you're playing an artifact deck, you may be playing Scrap Mastery. I don't think it's a card that's particularly under or overplayed. But whenever I see it, I go, uh-oh, this is probably going to be bad. What's in your graveyard again? And it's usually like, oh, I'm going to bring back 9 things. Oh, well, that's way better than me, who's losing 2 and getting none back.
Yeah, exactly. Now, but speaking of your Duretti deck, another card that you play in there that's also played in here, maybe just like a one-off of your Scrap Mastery, but only for yourself, is Goblin Welder.
Yeah.
So Goblin Welder is a 1/1 Goblin Artificer that says, for 1 red, it says tap, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal, as this ability resolves, that player basically switches them. So you're going to sacrifice the one that's on the board, and you're going to bring the one from your graveyard back to play. So you can use this on your own stuff, sacrifice a simple little treasure or a food token that you have in order to bring back an artifact that someone removed. Maybe someone took out your Soul Ring or your Mana Crypt. And we're going to use Goblin Welder to do that. Or you can use it on your opponent to maybe bring back a crappy artifact or something.
Absolutely. So this is really the first in the sacrifice engine mechanic, although it's not necessarily something you can do infinitely. Let's talk about some sacrifice outlets here. So the first one that we've got is Arcbound Ravager, and really one of the most important, and has that modular ability. So Arcbound Ravager says sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. It has modular 1, so this allows you to sacrifice your artifact creatures. If they have those +1/+1 counters on them, they're going to get that delayed trigger from Marchesa, come back and start your engine. So you can put counters on things. Some of these creatures that have, when they die, they or when they enter the battlefield, like a Meteor Golem, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent. You really want to be able to start throwing things on cards like that, or a Noxious Gear Hulk, or a Solemn Simulacrum. Really great, because it's going to come in, you're going to tutor for a land, and then you're going to draw a card when it dies. So Arcbound Ravager is really the first sacrifice engine that we see in this deck, and it's very strong.
Yeah, and you're also going to see some typical aristocrat sacrifice outlets like Ashnod's Altar and Spawning Pit. But since this is also an artifact theme one, you also have Crack Clan Ironworks as a good sacrifice outlet, both for your artifacts and for your artifact creatures. But on top of that, some of the best sacrifice outlet stuff that you can see is an interesting tech for the deck is Bolas's Citadel and Time Sieve. So Time Sieve is a Dimir card for a blue and a black where you can tap and sacrifice 5 artifacts to take an extra turn. And this is going to allow you to potentially take an infinite number of turns as long as you have 5 artifacts that are returning to the battlefield with +1/+1 counters. But you have Bolas's Citadel where you can tap and sacrifice 10 and permanents and deal 10 damage to each one of your opponents. On top of Bolas' Citadel, giving you so much extra advantage by being able to cast and play cards from the top of your library, take away some life to do it, make sure that the dethrone is happening, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So, specifically, also, we are not running a Sensei's Divining Top here. So just know Chris is not a monster like we are. So he's not going to go infinite with Bolas' Citadel and Sensei's Divining Top. But I do really think Time Thief is a very interesting card here. I don't mind people taking infinite turns if you can align that, and if you're going to win, you're going to win. We've also got Ashnod's Altar and Crack Clan Ironworks. So both of those cards allow you to sacrifice a creature, and you are going to, Ashnod's Altar at least allows you to sack a creature to get 2 colorless mana, and then Crack Clan Ironworks is sacrifice an artifact to get 2 colorless mana. So he specifically said that if you had to only keep one, Crack Clan Ironworks would be the one that he would get rid of. But since it's a creature-centric deck specifically and very artifact-heavy, both cards do make the cut here.
Yeah, I do think it's very interesting as the last sacrifice outlet here, having Greater Gargadon, which is a suspend creature that allows you to sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land in order to remove suspend counters on it, to have an uninteractable version of sacrifice outlet. So I do think that was very, very interesting. I'd never thought of something like that before. I don't think that really came up in our games, and I would really like to see how it plays out. There's a limit. You can only sacrifice 10 things to it, but I'm interested to see how well that one actually works.
It's funny, when I was looking at it, Greater Gargadon is only played in 684 decks based on EDH rec. I thought this was an interesting card. I have literally never seen this card played in Commander. I've seen it played in Modern,
yep,
in the deck that cares about all those suspend counters. But I've never seen this card be cast. And although you are, in fact, removing one of the suspend counters, there's nothing that they can do about it because it's not on the battlefield.
Right.
And then if you get a 9/7, you're like, all right, I'll take a 9/7 beast. Like, That's not nothing. Right. So let's talk about card advantage and tutors. So Marchesa's ability makes it easy to build up for a lot of card advantage here. So you've got cards like Trinket Mage, Sphinx Summoner, Solemn Simulacrum, Imperial Recruiter, and Baleful Strix that really tutor or ramp or draw cards when they enter the battlefield. So doing these things a lot is going to either help refill your hand or get you the pieces that you need to be able to stay in the game or ahead.
Right, and as we mentioned before, this being an aristocrat style deck, you're also going to be playing cards like Grim Horspecs. Whenever you sacrifice a non-token creature, you get to draw a card. On top of playing some of these really interesting planeswalkers, so Tezzeret the Seeker, Dak Faden, and Nicol Bolas Dragon God, having a lot of synergies to help you draw cards, keep your opponents down, and then also tutor specifically for artifacts with Tezzeret the Seeker.
Right, yeah. So, and then I think the card that I like the most, and I do think that this is an underplayed card. Maybe it's just something where we haven't seen a ton of people playing it, but it's Spark Double. So Spark Double can enter as a copy of a creature, but it can actually enter as a copy of a Planeswalker. A lot of people don't have it enter as a copy of a Planeswalker. You could get a second Marchesa, which is really great. So Spark Double for 3 and a blue, it's a 0/0. Basically, it's a what's the word I'm looking for?
A copy? A clone?
Thank you. It's a clone. Thank you. The word I was looking for was clone. But so it enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature. So interesting enough, it already comes in with a counter on it. So if it dies and it is a creature, it's just going to come back.
That's right. And it'll come back, and as long as it has a legal target, it'll come back as a copy of another creature with a +1/+1 counter on it.
Right.
So being in Grixis, you're also going to be able to play all the tutors that you want to play, like Diabolic Tutor, Diabolic Intent and Demonic Tutor. Obviously, Diabolic Intent having the extra ability of sacrificing a creature, which is important in Aristocrats deck. Just a tutor a piece that you're looking for. You're probably going to be tutoring for a sacrifice outlet, like most Aristocrats decks are going to do. And in this one, Arcbound Ravager is going to be our number one thing that we look for.
Absolutely. And so, and then Trinket Mage gets you a couple of cards here, specifically the Ozolith, Soul Ring, Skull Clamp, and Nile Spellbomb. So Nile Spellbomb is actually a very good card. I don't see it played a ton. It's an artifact for 1. You can sacrifice it to exile all cards from somebody's graveyard. Really important, especially in the meta that I play in. And then when it's put into a graveyard, you can pay a black and draw a card. So it really recycles itself and really allows you to control what people are and are not going to get back. If you're playing against somebody else who has a lot of artifacts, you might want to exile their graveyard before you cast your Scrap Mastery.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you said, in our play groups and our play styles, now including Chris, we play a lot of games with Chris too. There's more than just my graveyard to remove, which is fantastic. So we can remove other people's graveyards now.
Yeah, so Skull Clamp, really good card that's going to allow you to draw 2 cards whenever the equipped creature dies. These modular creatures are very small, so those will draw you cards. Another really good draw engine here, Joyra Weatherlight Captain. When you cast a historic spell, draw a card. So those are artifacts and legendaries and sagas. There's a lot of artifacts and a couple of legendaries in this deck, so you're probably going to get some mileage off of a Joyra.
For sure. Absolutely. Do you want to talk about some removal that this deck might have?
Yeah. So the first removal spell that we have is on a Noxious Gearhulk, a 5/4 for 4 and a black. It's a construct from the Kaladesh block. Menace, when it enters the battlefield, you can destroy target creature. If you destroy target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you would gain life equal to its toughness. So this allows you to gain a little bit of life. And if you have some problematic creatures out, you can potentially sacrifice this to one of your sack outlets that we went over, and keep bringing it back at the end of every turn. Right. Really.
So
it seems really strong.
So we've already mentioned a few cards in this deck that do require life in order to activate, like Unspeakable Symbol. In order to make that dethrone trigger work better with Marchesa, Noxious Gearhulk in there to kind of counterbalance that and gain some life back. Because if someone sees you low and they might see an opportunity to take you out, maybe you don't want to be that low. You take out a creature, gain some life. Noxious Gearhulk, enter the battlefield effects. So good. Love this card so much. I played it in all my Black Reanimator decks. It's fantastic.
Right. We've also got some removal in the form of Chaos Warp and Bedevil. They're just a couple of spells here that hit targets that might be more difficult for this deck to remove. And then Meteor Golem, a creature that we mentioned earlier. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy target non-land permanent that an opponent controls. And then we have some board wipes with Blasphemous Act, Cyclonic Rift to bounce everything, and then All is Dust. All is Dust is a spell that exiles all colored permanents. So very strong spell here. Something that a lot of people have trouble playing against.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because most of the time, your deck has color identity in most of it. And if you're not playing a full artifact deck, this is going to hit you hard. It's going to leave your own board available. We also see a couple pieces of spot removal with Chaos Warp and Bedevil because of their utility to be able to remove lots of different types of permanents.
Absolutely. And then one on a Planeswalker here, a Duretti, Ingenious Iconoclast, is a sack outlet, but it also allows you to bring back things. So you may sack an artifact if you destroy, it doesn't bring back, if you do destroy target artifact or creature. So you're making a lot of artifacts. This could be like a sack outlet for its -1. And if you sacrifice, let's say, one of these creatures with a counter on it, you've got a destroy, you've got really 2 destroy spells then. So very, very good there. Mana Ramp. So the deck does not run a Metal Worker. So specifically, it was in the deck, but it actually shifted over to Psi Master Thopterist. But since there were not a ton of things that were benefiting from that, it often died before it was untapped. So instead, we're running like Signets that are in the Grixis colors here.
Yeah, interesting point that Chris pointed out is that he only uses the Talisman of Dominance in the Grixis cycle of talismans, just because it does have a lot of stuff that does cost life and not a ton of stuff to gain life back. So he doesn't want to run all of the talismans and risk being too greedy in the early game in order to use those talismans for color pips and get to too low of a life total right from the start. So that's the reason why Talisman of Dominance is the only talisman in there.
Right. And there's an Ancient Tomb that taps for 2 mana. I do not see the elusive Temple of the False God here, but that's probably fine because there's only 34 lands in this deck. So the deck that has these rocks like Gilded Lotus and Thran Dynamo that are very large are Chris mentioned are a relic of a different time of Commander. So they, they're still used, but they, this deck is not, crazy on ramp here, but we do have some. So they could be replaced with newer cards like Arcane Signet. So again, there could be some improvements made to the deck, but right now it works pretty great.
Yeah, an Arcane Signet, seeing a reprint in Commander Legends, and seeing a reprint at I can't remember if they're printing this at common or uncommon, but either way, it's going to put Arcane Signet hopefully in a more affordable state. I think it is a few dollars right now. So maybe price is what's keeping you away, because maybe you don't want to spend $5 on a 2-mana artifact. You're only going to play, or you're only going to get in your hand once every 10 games you play.
Right. That and Thought Vessel, reprinted as well. So really great. Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of win cons here. So I think one of the most interesting win cons here is in Reckless Fireweaver. So it's a human artificer that says when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you're going to sack a bunch of things and bring it back, you're going to deal a lot of damage, which feels very reminiscent of Perforos, God of the Forge, which is also in this deck, which says when a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. And since all of these artifact creatures that you're going to be sacking are in fact creatures, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage pretty quickly.
Yeah, very interesting take on the whole aristocrat style of taking advantage of Perforos, but to enter the battlefield of doing 2 damage every time they enter. Typically, when you're looking at aristocrats deck, it is very focused around black, and you're doing your Zulaport cutthroat triggers and all that kind of stuff. But Perforos actually, puts that on another level because you're getting 2 damage every time something enters the battlefield rather than only dealing 1 damage every time something dies. So that's very cool. Now, my favorite win con in here is actually one that I played in Standard in a God Pharaoh's Gift deck, and that is Marionette Master. So Marionette Master has this really cool keyword ability called Fabricate, and it has Fabricate 3. So whenever Marionette Master enters the battlefield, you can either choose to get 3 1/1 servo tokens, or you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on Marionette Master. But the second ability is really what's going to kill people. And it says whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So now this can actually double and triple and quadruple when we're talking about a card like the Ozolith, and we can start just throwing a bunch of +1/+1 counters on Marionette Master. And every time you sacrifice every time your modular creatures are dying, or you're sacrificing them, you can pump Marionette Master on top of start dealing damage to people's face.
Yeah, I really like this card a lot. I think it's very strong. And I do know this is a card that you do play in Shirei, so I have definitely seen the power. And then again, the deck has one other win con here. I mean, it has a couple. Obviously, you can go infinite turns, but the one that I really like that I've never seen happen is Mirrored and Besieged, an enchantment that allows you, it's a modal enchantment, right? So you pick Mirror or Phyrexian. Mm-hmm. So Mirror is whenever you cast an artifact, you create a mirror. Or Phyrexian, which is usually chosen here, is at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard a card. If you have 15 or more artifacts in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. So it's not necessarily, I'm just going to win. I'm going to take out someone that I might have trouble beating later in the game to win the game. Or I guess if you're down to just one person, you win. So I have really enjoyed going through this deck. This is a deck that I would put this together to play. I have most of these cards. They're just in other decks.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely fantastic. It's in Grixis, which is amazing. You can put as much support in it as you want. It's Aristocrats, which is amazing. and I did have an artifacts deck in Esper for a while. So it's interesting to see the support in red for artifacts versus the support in white for artifacts. I think you could definitely make arguments for both, but absolutely, it's a great take on Marchesa with the whole modular effect behind it. Very, very unique. I really, really like it.
Right. This was a really fun deck. So Chris, thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon. We were so excited to do this deck tech this week. So we look forward to playing more games with you. And everybody, please go check out this deck. If you want to find Chris, again, you can find him on Twitter at Kelsom Gaming. We will have his deck linked below. And that is actually it for this week. We want to thank you all for listening. Don't forget, this week we're going to be playing Commander with Dan Kraus and Lane from the Mana Rock podcast. We will be streaming next week with Tap That MTG for our art-themed game. So if you want to contact, you can find our podcast on Twitter at guardianprojectpodcast.com, or I'm sorry, online. That's not Twitter. You can find us online at theguardianprojectpodcast.com. You can find our social media on Twitter at guardianpod and our gameplay videos at youtube.com/guardianproject. You can email us at guardianprojectpod@gmail.com. And then for me, you can find me on Twitter at ATFlory.
And you can find me on Twitter at WormCoilEngine.
And that's it for episode 75. We will be back next week. And
just want to give a special shout out to our producer, Ryan, at Ryan Nichols. If you want to check out him and tweet at him and tell him how good of a job he's doing. And, I know we just did his deck tech, but special shout out to Chris Wolfe, Kelzum Gaming, for all of the artwork that he's been doing for our channel and everything. Amazing stuff. Definitely check out both of his deck building and all of his graphic arts.
Yes, he does all of our thumbnails for every video, and he did our overlay for our stream, so if you've seen it, and it looks a lot more professional now. We have Chris to thank.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Have a great week, everyone. We will be back next week. Like normal, I guess. I didn't need to tell everybody that, but we'll be back.
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere, I guess is what I'm saying.
We're going to have an episode for your Thanksgiving.
It'll be episode 76.
Gobble, gobble.
Bye, everyone.